Hi everybody, I'm really pleased to introduce our three speakers on the theme of women's environmental activism. This is the first in what we hope to be a series of events to inspire and encourage Green Party women. We apologise in advance that 10-minute slots, these presentations will only be a tiny taster of these women's amazing work. So first up we have Lily Fitzgibbons. Lily is a founding member of Bristol Youth Strike for Climate, played a key role in the campaign against Bristol Airport expansion and organised the protest in Bristol attended by Greta Thunberg, which had a turnout of 30,000 people. She is currently the youngest councillor elected in her city. I've never met Lily, so I'm really looking forward to her contribution today. Thank you.
Thank you, that's quite an introduction. I'm going to try and share my screen because I have some slides so that you can see some pictures. And if it's not working, someone do let me know. Can everyone see that?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, good. So yes, as you said, I was one of the founding members of Bristol Youth Strike for Climate, which was part of the movement across the country that many of you may have encountered in your own cities and towns. We had 12 strikes from February of 2019 to February of 2020, which was every month in Bristol. Some places chose to do weekly or every other week, but we went for once a month. And so we started off with the UKSCN, which is the UK Student Climate Network, was the organisation that tried to oversee the youth strikes, and the demands were the same demands for everyone to create a cohesive movement. They centred around Save the Future, which consisted of calling for the government to declare a climate emergency and implement a Green New Deal. Demand 2 was Teach the Future, which was about reforming the national curriculum to include a sense of urgency around climate change and proper education in our schools. Demand 3 was about, again, a sense of urgency. It was that the government had to combat misinformation about climate change and convey the sense of crisis that we're really in. And then Demand 4, Empower the Future, was all about empowering young people to get involved with lowering the voting age to 16 and also implementing a form of proportional representation. So we started off with 3 strikes from February to April of the first year, and we were entirely centred around these demands. And during this time, we were actually invited to meet with the Mayor of Bristol, which is what this photo here is. So we started off with a lot of momentum, but we really felt that we couldn't keep going on forever with these sort of rather vague demands. And I particularly, perhaps because of my time in the Green Party, my experience with Target to Win, felt that we needed something to connect us to the city and to the area. And I already knew and had been involved with some excellent work with our local action on climate emergency group around the airport expansion. So in May, we shifted to holding these protests around the single specific issue of Bristol Airport expansion, and they did really well. We had a much higher turnout than we had had for the first 3. So then we organised 3 protests around this issue, and again, after the 3rd month, we got to the same point of feeling that it was not stagnating, but the momentum wasn't picking up. This is just an example of some of our advertising and literature that we created to promote these events. So on September the 20th, we switched it up again. This was after calls from Greta Thunberg to invite all adults to join us for a general strike. And we were lucky that Bristol became a focus location for the Southwest. So a lot of other strike groups in the area really focused on our protests. They gave us support and funding and encouraged their members to come join us. And we had a really, really strong turnout. I think we were second only to London. So these are some more pictures from that particular event. So then again, my role within the group was partly focused on safety. So I did our police liaison, I organised our stewards, but I really did the political sides of things. I really wanted us to be involved with our local council because of the way in which young people don't know about local politics and aren't engaged, but also because they have a certain amount of power that people overlook in wider society as well. So we then wrote our Bristol specific demands, which I have to say were influenced by what our Green Party councillors were doing at the time, but I was always careful to be non-partisan when I could. So we ended up with, we wanted to call for a Green New Deal for Bristol, which was something that our local councillors had put a motion forward for. We wanted all of the candidates for mayor to have a 2-term plan for achieving our neutrality targets of 2030, because half of the work has to be done in the years that we're in now. We wanted to ensure that air pollution across Bristol was at or below the legal limit. This was partly alongside a campaign called Our City, who have been campaigning on this issue and we did a lot of work with. We were calling for free bus travel for under 21s and students, partly because our current mayor had promised this in campaign manifestos and to this day has still not implemented anything of the kind. And we did also get involved with some support for pedestrianising certain roads in the city centre, usually focused around the local people in that area, calling for it. But so we organised the next 3 protests around these issues, and again, they went well. We tried to change up our tactics as much as we could. We did a lovely Valentine's Day strike on the 14th of February 2020, where we got everyone to write love letters, not only to the planet, but to the mayor, which we hand delivered. We collected several hundred of those. But then again, we did get slightly surprised that just 2 weeks later, Greta Thunberg did get in contact and inform us that she was coming to Bristol, partially because of the work that had been done in the city around the airport expansion. It was a key reason for drawing her to Bristol. So we had just 8 days to organise this protest. And we had a turnout of 30,000 people, which was very overwhelming. And I'd like to reiterate again that there was a team of about 10 of us, all under 18, all doing school at the same time, who managed to pull this off. And it was really amazing to have that team behind me. So here are just some more images of that day. I like this one because the policeman makes me laugh. But yes, that's an overview of the actual campaigning work that we did. But I did want to talk a little bit about my experiences as a young woman in these movements, because it was really empowering and inspiring to see that most of the people that I worked with or interacted with were women. The spaces, these activist spaces, particularly in Bristol, were overwhelmingly young women with the occasional young man, but it was unlike any other space that I had been in. At this point, I was engaged in a lot of other political activities. I did Model United Nations, for example, through my school, and I was one of 2 girls at that entire conference. Whenever I engaged with more traditional political spaces, I found that I was in a minority as a young woman and that I was treated slightly differently than I would be in these activist circles. And I think that there's a really important question for us to ask as people who are not just members of a political party but are here to hear about activism is, what is it that attracts young women to these spaces, and how can we get them to continue that energy and organising work in the more traditional structures? Because what actually inspired me to make the move to run as a councillor is that I felt that no matter how good you are on the outside of the council building, you need to have good people on the inside as well, because activism and politics work hand in hand to create change. So I think that we have also seen this sort of in the way that certain, I won't name anyone, certain world leaders did react to Greta as a figure. I think that she inspired a kind of annoyance in some older men that was partially to do with her being so young, yes, but partially to do with the fact that she seems like a very young girl who was trying to tell people what to do, and the people in charge did not appreciate that. And I certainly felt that myself whenever I met with particular leaders. If we go back to the image here with the mayor, this meeting was not one that we had asked for. He reached out to us. He wanted to give us a photo op so that he could then get us to be quiet and send us on our way. It felt like a pat on the head. Well done, I'll give you a picture. Please stop criticising me. And also these young men in the picture that he brought along with him were youth counsellors, which I think is another example of a structure that has a lot more young men in than young women. So I think that is a summary of the points most close to my heart. And if you want me to, yes, I've just been seen, I got my 1 minute warning, so I'm happy to finish a minute early.
Wow, thank you ever so much, Lily. That was really brilliant. I mean, just showed such fantastic energy, an amazing movement, and very well thought out strategy, I think. And also shows that there's something very powerful about women coming together to act on these issues. So thank you ever so much. We'll now move on to our second speaker. This is Alison Teal. I first met Alison at a small bedraggled trees protest in Sheffield. Alison went on to be a leading light in the amazing Sheffield Street Trees campaign, which not only succeeded in saving hundreds of mature trees in Europe's greenest city, but led to 13 Green Party councillors being elected, which ended overall Labour control. I think that shows the links between activism and political power. Alison currently holds the Cooperative Executive Portfolio for Sustainable Neighbourhoods, Wellbeing, Parks and Leisure. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Mandy. And yeah, lovely to be here, and thanks for all your interest. It's great to see so many people here. Now, 10 minutes is quite a short time to cover several years of activism, just focused on the tree campaign. So I'm sort of going to rattle through things a bit, just to try and give you an overall flavour. So the tree campaign was my introduction to how power works in society. And I'd spent the first 50 years of my life being incredibly naive about it, but I've learned so much since I've been actively involved. So amongst other campaigners, I started defending trees in June 2015 when we found out that a street nearby was going to lose relatively small trees, and it didn't really make much sense and we couldn't understand why. And so we just actually went and stood in front of them and stopped arborists being able to cut them down, and that's how it began. So this went on for a while, and then the council started to work harder to try and cut more trees down by sending out crews simultaneously to different streets and all this sort of thing. And we developed lots of methods of communication, and WhatsApp was really important to us for getting messages across the city, and people would be driving around and it was sort of real cat and mouse type stuff. Quite exciting often, but also lots of scary times as well. The council began to escalate the ways that they were responding to protesters, because they were starting to worry, I suppose, about their bottom line, sending crews out continually and having them return without actually having cut any trees. And so this was starting to become a financial problem, and that started to change their tactics. So the first arrests took place, where people standing under trees took place in November 2016. And that really boosted the profile of the campaign, because when you get police and courts involved, that's when the journalists start to get interested and start to report things. Further arrests took place, and I was included in that. In February 2017, 7 of us were arrested for sitting under a chestnut tree, and a Labour council actually used anti-trade union legislation, which is quite extraordinary in itself, to say that we were interfering with a workman and his tools, preventing the person from being able to do their job, and that's what we got arrested on. We were taken to some cells, which were maximum security cells that were like the door was as deep as a bank vault. It was quite something, and I was held there for 8 hours and 41 minutes. It said on my record sheet, which is quite a tough stint to do, given that all I'd done was sit under a tree. So really kind of escalating and extreme in terms of clearly trying to frighten people, and intimidate people from continuing this behaviour, from trying to protect trees. So following that, some more people were arrested, and they were really starting to get worried. And so they went to the High Court and asked for an injunction against the protesters, which meant it created a special little law pertaining to Sheffield streets. And essentially, wherever arborists were trying to do felling work, they would create a barrier. And if you did anything to go inside the barrier, etc., then you could be taken to court for breaching the injunction. So that happened in July 2017, I think it was, yeah. And then they managed to get their injunction granted at very great cost. We're talking like over £100,000 to get one of these injunctions. So then they started to accuse lots of campaigners of breaching the injunction. I was one of those people, and I was taken to the High Court and facing the potential for committal, which is that I could have been sent to prison for supposedly breaching the injunction on 2 counts. They were paying barristers £15,000 a day to deal with these cases, and there were a couple of the staff from a multinational company, Amy, gave evidence against me, and that was really shocking. Again, being so naive, you don't think that people lie on the stand, but yes, they do. When the interests of capital are a priority, that these are the things that happen. And the judge, however, thankfully had read the information that I'd given to the court and actually dismissed the case before I had to take the stand, which was really gratifying. And yeah, what a relief that was. And yeah, there was no case to answer for me. And so what that tells you is that the judge had seen that the evidence had been fabricated, that it was insubstantial and not sufficient to lead to me even being fined, let alone sent to prison. So, you know, this tells you that there's quite, yeah, a lot of, yeah, very, very concerning behaviour, shall we say, have been going on to enable these sorts of things to happen, and at great public expense. So I'll just tell you a few more things that happened. So it's just crazy stuff, like a woman who was blowing a child's trumpet, who we now call Tooting One. She was arrested for a breach of the peace. Many activists were handled really roughly. They started, not only were police there, they started to employ security guards around trees. These security guards physically, they actually punched people, they kicked people. Some people got fingers pulled back and wrists twisted, and all these kind of tactics, really shocking things you don't expect to happen. The police were witnessing this. We were asking them to take action. They wouldn't do anything. We made complaints to the police, formal complaints about the violence that was happening by the security workers, and not a single one of our complaints was ever investigated. A campaigner was dragged out of his bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, taken into custody, accused of violence against a security worker. He was a really sweet guy, really gentle, was actually a yoga teacher. These were the sort of tactics that they were employing to intimidate and harass people. We used to stand out in all weathers. We started doing nighttime patrols because they got very sneaky and started to actually begin to fell trees with handsaws, pardon me, in the middle of the night. And so we had to do patrols in the nighttime as well as in the daytime. We had to raise well over £100,000 to be able to pay for the court costs of all these people who are being arrested and fighting off the injunctions and the accusations of breaches, etc. It was an incredibly costly campaign. MPs got involved as well. Paul Blomfield, who's the MP for Sheffield Central, he sent out a list, which was basically a pack of lies about actions that he said protesters had taken, such as driving nails into trees to affect, you know, to make the chainsaws rebound on workers, and really shocking stuff like that. He accused people of smearing fake feces on trees and all these kinds of really shocking things to try and demonize campaigners and make the publicity towards us really negative. Louise Hay, MP for Gleadless Valley, she wrote to constituents saying that she had proof that campaigners were committing criminal acts, again, completely untrue. So the collusion between the government, local government and central government and a multinational company and the police was really extraordinary to me. I just had no idea that that they kind of helped each other out in that way, if you like. Amazing things like the first arrest that took place, protesters were discussing with the police about what was happening, and we saw that they were reading off. They had a print off of the information that they were giving us, and it had been supplied by Amy's legal department. So the multinational company were actually advising the police on what legislation they could use to take us off the streets. Of course, it's all gotten much worse now, because now we're facing the police and crime bill, where there's a chance that we won't, that we'll be arrested just for being there in the first place without even having an opportunity to negotiate about the whys and wherefores of why we're there. So it's really, really worrying what's happened.
I'm so sorry, Alison. We've run out of time.
I didn't see my minutes warning, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, well, just to wrap up, it wasn't all terrible. I just wanted to say that actually it was the sense of camaraderie, the way that you build community. It's just actually really wonderful. So even though it was one of the most terrible things that's happened, it was also one of the most wonderful, because there's nothing like getting together with people who are like-minded and achieving a remarkable goal. And we did achieve a remarkable goal, because they wanted to fell 17,500 trees, and we stopped them at 5,500 trees. So we actually saved 12,000 trees. I'm tremendously proud of that. Sorry, I went over time. Thank you.
Fantastic, Alison. Thanks so much. I think I introduced you by saying you saved hundreds of trees. I was completely wrong. It was tens of thousands. Brilliant. And I think your talk shows very much that alliance between the private interests and the state, and how an seemingly innocent campaign just to save some trees, which you'd think any human being would be wanting to do, can come back on you once you start being effective. So thank you for that. Right, our third and final speaker today is Tina Rothery. There are few of us in the north of England who have not heard of the anti-fracking nanas, and hopefully the rest of England. Having recently become a nana myself, I'm delighted to introduce Tina, co-founder of the very womanly campaign which stood up to the fracking giant quadrilla, using tactics such as singing, knitting and slow walking, and which led to the complete halting of fracking in the UK in 2019. So welcome, Tina.
Thank you so much. I'd love to get Nanas to take the whole credit, but it really was a nationwide and international campaign, the anti-fracking campaign. And listening to both Lily and Alison, I'm struck by how similar our experiences. We too found that it was very much a women-led campaign, and not just in the UK, but across the world. The Australian knitting nanas, the Indigenous grandmothers in America. And, there was, I'd say this campaign was 70% women all the way through. I think partly because in the beginning, when fracking first came about, that we first heard about it, the first things we heard was that it could affect women particularly because the chemicals used were bad for things like breast cancer. There was an awful story, one of the earliest ones to come out of Utah, about the increased number of baby graves that midwives brought to the attention of the press. Eventually, it got a front page on Rolling Stone as an issue, but not until, and this was the bit that really hurts me, is that the fracking had led to all these early term losses in pregnancy, and yet no one really paid attention until the horse breeders in the area discovered that their prize-winning foals were being born with misaligned jaws and all these other abnormalities. And then, because obviously a foal is worth far more than a human child in their world, And that was heartbreaking and brought a lot of us, I think, to the cause. I'd say that where I was going to start with this was that for me, politics, activism, the Green Party and women are all of my favorite subjects. It was Caroline Lucas's arrest at Bolcombe that I was watching, that I was there, and that first introduced me really to the Green Party. And then I went on to bump into Natalie Bennett in fields and protests across the UK, Amelia Womack as well. We had so much support from the Green Party. And when I joined it, it was just, at the time, there was no other political party on our side. Eventually, by the end of the campaign, so that was 2011, by the end of the campaign in 2019, at the end of 2019, every political party, except the Tories, obviously, then was speaking out against fracking. And in Scotland and Ireland, they already had their moratorium. So it was just down to England and the Tories in the end. So it was like nibbling away. You know, when people say, how do you eat an elephant's head? You know, how do you do that? How do you eat an elephant, I think? Not that you would, but, you know, it's like 1 teaspoon at a time. You know, you keep nibbling away and you just don't stop. And once you're in, you can't get out. And that's what I found with women in the movement, was that there was a resilience and a comradeship that made it bearable. Like Alison said, you know, a lot of it is really hard. You know, I still owe Quadrilla 55 grand. I packed my bags. I was going to prison. There was no getting out of it. I was due into style prison for 2 weeks for occupying a field and refusing to pay a £55,000 fine. And so I went to the court that day, but so did 500 people. 500 people came as well. And I think the judge realized that had he sent me to prison that day, it would have been such a kickback, you know? So I kind of got out of that one on the basis that it was a ridiculous amount of money to charge any one grandma for occupying a field that was not in use for 3 weeks. So there was a lot of hard bits. The police violence against our bodies was surreal. You know, I think it wasn't necessarily that the police were deliberately targeting the women, but the police had no idea here in Blackpool that, or didn't seem to realize that it's not Saturday night in town where you pick some guy up and you throw him out of the way. Because I watched them pick up one of the ladies next to me and throw her, and she landed 2 lanes across the road in front of oncoming traffic. The weight of our body was not the same, and yet they treated us the same as the men. And like Alison, and I beat you on the hours in jail, we were arrested countless times and put in jail. And I think that's one of the most horrific experiences. But by the same token, you had to be careful, because there are a lot of women who wanted to join you on a front line and say, no, I don't want this in my community either. But, you know, family circumstances, a lot of us are caring for our elders or children, and time in jail and court. And, you know, that wasn't something you could factor into your life, but we still needed those people at the side of the road. So we created events like Wednesday mornings, which was Wednesday Women. So we'd gather at a place together. We'd walk up the road together, you know, anything from, you know, 30 to a few hundred women would walk up that hill. We'd hold a 15-minute silence, and then we would dance, sing, share food. It was bliss. And the judge exempted us from the injunction of types of behavior at the site, because he said, oh no, they're not protesting fracking. And we weren't. On Wednesday mornings, we called it a call for calm. It was a call for an end to the violence and tension and stress that we all would have been through all that week. So we had this place. And for me personally, and I know a lot of the other women who did this, it was every day your anger and rage built, watching people, you know, people being harmed by police and security, and this obstruction, this vile thing being built on the horizon that you know was going to bring harm to your children. All of that every single day to face that. And we had this campaign went on for 1,000 days. You couldn't have lived and existed and returned every day if you didn't have a good reason to beyond that, because it hurt and it tore you apart. But Wednesdays, we would put down all of the aggression of the week and start again. So every week after the Wednesday unity, we would then be, okay, right, now let's start again. And, you know, there were days where we watched people like, I'm sure we all know Ann Power, you know, a woman in her late 80s. And we watched the police grab her and drag her without supporting her feet so that her shoes fell off. And they dragged her across the road. And yet still, even your women who would normally go, well, I'm not going into a conflict situation, would find a way to get there at least on a Wednesday to be heard. And I think that was really important. And to make any campaign endure for as long as nearly 3 years, you need to have continuous things that make it a pleasure. And you know, even on the days where we get there at 7 in the morning to get set up for the day, blockade the gates, get in the way we did it was we did things like slow walking around the gate area, knitting inconveniently, if you could imagine that, playing drums, and just, you know, wheeling across a tea trolley and dropping things. So everything was only a little bit of a delay, a little bit of a delay, a little bit of a delay. But all of these delays messed with them. It messed with the organizers and the planners and their deliveries. And we got a heads up one day that concrete trucks, I mean, who knew? I don't really know much about concrete. The concrete trucks, if they were delayed at all, the concrete would go off or start to set. So they were on a real time limiter. So they were your prize thing, you know, a few drops on your trolley and a little bit of a trip up or a wait till I get myself organized. All of that would mess with that concrete delivery to the point where they stopped getting deliveries to the site and had them delivered nearby so that it would be brought in by a vehicle that wouldn't be so obvious. And then there was a part where they ended up putting a concrete manufacturing thing actually on the site and brought in the raw materials instead because we were just so inconvenient. And I remember part of the reason that fighting it as women was different, and I've been on lots of front lines, was that we did it with a certain cheek and humor, and we were able to shame the police officers and security for their treatment of us. There was a day we set up, I mean, and you may have all heard of things called lock-ons. So that's where we put our arms in a tube or something, and we lay there and we get in the way deliberately, and it takes them hours and hours or days to cut us out. And that can really mess with the site and delay progress. But the women on one of the days decided to do a thing called a yarn on. So what we did was we had 3 knitting circles of 6 in each circle, and we were just knitting, and they weren't moving us out of the way until a truck came. So they figured we were no bother. 18 women knitting, you know, you can get rid of them in a jiffy. So what they hadn't seen is that we all had woolly handcuffs. All our wool was woven into a basket in the center that was wrapped around all our chairs and our legs and our arms. And that in the end, as we were knitting, we were actually weaving ourselves together into an unterripartable bundle like kittens with wool. It was just, at one point, the police observed this and realized that maybe it wasn't going to be as easy. And one of them came over and said, "Oh, Tina, I think you need to be careful. That's starting to look like you all might get knotted together." I was like, "You saw the thing. We called it a yarn on. How did you miss that?" Anyway, at that point, 5 police vehicles turned up. 10 police from each vehicle came out, and they started to tear us apart. And I think this was the only time we ever got a half-decent headline in the Daily Mail. It said, 50 Lancashire cops bear down on 18 knitting OAPs. And they did, you know, and when you're in a bit of a panic situation like that, where they're ripping you apart, and I just started to wrap the wool around my neck. I didn't know why. I just was trying to grab wool, and then the lady next to me started to move and nearly killed me. But and then the photograph was them holding my head back and slicing with secateurs around off my neck. So I think a lot of the work that we do as activists is to show up the lunacy and the absolute injustice of the way we're treated, and how that ties into politics for me, and the Green Party in particular, is that we show that we walk the talk. And you only have to look at people like Lily and Alison to know that being an activist raises a profile, shows that you mean business, shows that if you were in power, you would seek to attain change. And so to me, this is politics. There isn't politics and activism. There is one thing. You walk the talk. And also it shows that we bring together.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, is it a minute?
Yeah, but time's up. But if you just wind up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, it was only to say that another thing that we did was we brought together political parties, unions, residents, activists, and we brought those together continuously and showed the cooperation works. So, yeah, anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to have that talk.
Well, thank you very much, Tina. That was very powerful. 1,000 days puts a lot of us to shame, but I think you've done a lot to encourage us all there with the inconvenient knitting and everything else. And I think it shows, resilience and comradeship can lead to amazing things. So I'm going to hand over to Annie now to chair the discussion. Thank you.
So I've got a great question in the chat from Amelia Womack, actually, which is a question to everybody, which is, were there moments when you thought you weren't going to win, and how did you find the strength to keep on going?
I think constantly, Amelia, and you know, I remember conversations with you, Amelia, at the roadside, you know, on days where we were despondent and falling apart and thinking, why are there only 3 of us here this morning? Where is everyone else? You know, and then a bus would arrive with people from Manchester or something, or the Green Party from Lancaster would come up the hill, and you would be up again, you know. And the number of times in the press we were told, and at every public meeting we were told, you know what, the government wants this, you will never succeed. And to me, that was like telling me, well, I've got a gun at your head. Are you going to duck? Of course you're going to duck. I don't care if you tell me there is no way out of this. If it's so bad that I have to fight it, then I'm just going to fight it anyway. So, yeah, there was a lot of feeling. But you know what? Sometimes that feeling like you're losing is what brings out the best in the people standing beside you who lift you back up.
For me, it didn't really matter whether we were going to lose or not. And so it's not something that I actually focused on. I mean, we were doing what was important in the moment. And it always felt right, and so I didn't have any doubts about that. And like Tina said, we did find lots of ways to make it fun and enjoyable, and so that helped us turn out every day that we could. So yeah, it was that feeling of solidarity, that sense of doing the right thing that drove us on year.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you've both said. The only thing I would add is that I feel that I made some friends for life, really, through these movements, and to have those people that you never would have met otherwise, to then be able to rely on them because they're going through the same experience. I think that's what kept me going.
Age often intersects with gender in a way that you're treated in politics, and you both gave examples of both sides of the scale almost. Do you have examples of feeling that you were underestimated, and how did you overcome it?
I have many examples of being underestimated, definitely, with people who went into a meeting with me expecting a certain thing, or didn't think that I would have the facts or that I would understand the depth of the situation. I think most of the time, particularly men, would come in to try and say, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing. Let me tell you." So for me, it was about being very well prepared and very well researched for these encounters. But I think actually the worst of it was online. I don't want to make this absolutely miserable, but I received some really nasty and disgusting hate online, some of which was centered around my age and often was to do with my appearance or my attractiveness, whether this person decided I was or was not. And I, to this day, haven't quite found a solution to dealing with that, other than, knowing when to look and when to not look and who to block.
Yeah, underestimated. And I can imagine for Lily that they also thought that partly because of your age, as well as, the fact that you're a woman. So with us, before we became Nanas, that was a group we set up in 2014. But I'd been fighting fracking from 2011 and then realized that I really could do with a gang and that support mechanism, and Nanas became that. And I literally remember the day before we became Nanas and did our first action as Nanas, being treated really brutally in the usual way, by police and stuff. And then when we took the field and we had these cute little tabards on and little headscarves and we were brandishing cake and tea, the police came and leaned over the fence and went, "Oh, what are you up to? What is it you're doing then?" And I thought, oh my God, because I'm in a different outfit and I seem sweet and I'm now telling you I'm a Nana, suddenly it makes a difference. And again, the same, but there was some reasoning behind that, because you look at media, quite often it'll say environmental activist, campaigner, tree hugger. And I thought, you know what, we're none of those things. What we are is concerned people, concerned mothers and grandmothers and grandparents and so on. So by saying Nana, it made people, yes, underestimate us, but also realize that if, you know, young women like Lily or, you know, grandparents like us are engaged in this fight, there's some reason to be, because it's not the usual people, you know? So I think that helps.
Great, thank you. So then the question just for Alison is, what was the rationale put forward by the council for chopping down the trees? That comes from Eleanor in Bristol.
Yeah, they claimed that it was essential part of the Highway Act, that curbs had to be straight and that there could be no encroachment from trees on the road. Well, it turns out that that's completely wrong, but that's actually what, you know, a High Court judge actually bought that rationale, but of course it wasn't correct.
Brilliant, thank you. And then I have a question that's a good one as well for Alison and Lily from Helen. I don't know which party they're from, but it is, for now that you're both councillors, what are the similarities and differences to being a campaigner in comparison to being a councillor? Let's go for Alison first and then Lily for that.
Being a campaigner is so much more fun. I would say. I love being a campaigner. There's great energy in it. There's a lot of movement in it. Being a councillor is great too, but of course there's a lot more administrative, a very big administrative role, and yeah, just yeah, a lot more meetings, a lot more being indoors. I like being outside. I like hanging around trees, and so yeah, very different environments that you're operating in, and they're very different type of work. Yeah.
Lily?
Yes, I'd have to add to that. I feel that I went particularly because our campaign was so concerned with the issues of the entire world, you know, and trying to save the planet, which is quite a big task, to go from that to, you know, now my problems are someone's bins haven't been collected, or I can't park in front of my house, which feels like a very different scale, but you know, has to be treated as just as important. Though I would add that in Bristol, because we are in opposition, often the role of an opposition councillor feels very similar to an activist in the continual holding to account and asking the annoying questions and really just bugging them.
Right, so we've got another question, which is from Linda in Salisbury, and it is, what can Green Party of England and Wales do about police violence to women that demonstrate?
It's really a double-edged sword. You know, there was a lot of times I live streamed a great deal, partly for evidence gathering, mainly for evidence gathering, and then because then it got people so engaged, you know, people followed it every day. But when you did that, you were aware that if I showed all of the violence all of the time, no one would ever come. You know, you needed people to be brave, and you're not brave until you're there. Once you're there, I always call it like, you know, activism to me is like there's a door marked activism, and when you walk through it, it's a sheer drop, just a sheer drop. Once you're in, there's no exit door, because for me personally, every exit door has my granddaughter's face on it. So I can't walk away. I can't go home. So you kind of need to Pied Piper people in, but you can't pretend it's going to be easy, but you still need them there, you know. So that creating a space like the Wednesday morning was really important, to give people almost like a nursery introduction where you're not going to be beaten up today. No one is going to hurt you today. But if you stay here past 2 o'clock, it will happen. And, you know, and there were people who could never come back for those bits. How do we stop the police from doing that? I think the continuous shaming, if we had, you know, what Alison mentioned about the collusion between police, security and the companies, that's really relevant, you know. Our police worked more with Quadrilla and very little with the community liaison group. There was a community liaison group. We attended the meetings and we raised our issues, but we were not heard. I don't know what the solution is. I think the shape of the way that society is rigged against activists, against women, and against justice. And I wish I had an answer, but I just have rage.
Thanks. Great answer, Tina. What can we do? It becomes obvious once you're involved that the police aren't there to look after people, or they don't care about your human rights or anything. They're there to look after the interests of private capital. And so I don't see any way of interfering with that under the current system that we have. because the law is there for property, it's not there for people. And so other than, as Tina suggested, that shaming them, exposing the violence, there's going to be there's two documentaries been made about the Tree campaign, and I'm really excited. One's premiering on the 20th of March, Sunday, in Sheffield at the City Hall, if anyone can get to come and see it. And you'll see there in the documentary, I imagine there'll be quite a few examples of the sorts of things that campaigners had to put up with from the police. The police just didn't care. As I said, we reported multiple incidents of violence towards campaigners, and the police never investigated a single one. They just don't care. It's awful.
I don't feel that I have much I can say, as I did not have much experience of this, and it's really inspiring actually hearing what you all went through in both Sheffield and the Nanas, because I was very determined to make the youth strikes a space for all ages, and we had a lot of primary school age children. In fact, there were some protests where I feel we had more children from primary school than of any other age group, and I wanted parents to be able to bring their children to these events. So I spent a lot of time working with the police, making sure that we were always treading the line but never quite doing anything that was arrestable.
Also, it's quite, I think, a good point to say that it was very notable that your, particularly your Greta protest, which had, was it 30,000 people, something like that, and you ensured that you had at the front a safe area for children and people with SEND needs as well, so that it was a safe place for them to stand and still be able to attend. And it was a really amazing thing to have done for accessibility. And
I was under 18 at the time as well, so I think that really made it trickier for the police when they were interacting with me, because I was their only point of contact, and I made sure I was their only one. I didn't want them in contact with anyone who was old enough to be held liable in a different way.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, so how can we as a party address the problem of ageism against our activists and councillors, whether older or younger than the default middle-aged person? We'll go to Alison, then Tina, then Lily.
I'm not sure that we do have an ageism. Do we have an ageism problem in the Green Party? I don't know. I think we pay particular attention to ensuring that voices get heard. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot to say about that. I wasn't aware that people considered that to be a particular problem. What do you think, Tina?
Was it me next? I lost track. Is it me next, Danny?
Oh, yeah, yes, it's
okay.
You next, yeah.
I'd say that I don't really experience it. I know, for instance, like when Lily was talking earlier, we went along to the youth strikes as nanas, and we went along more as like bodyguards and watchdogs, the nanas. So as they were marching, I was watching, and like the police were trying to tell the young people things that they could or couldn't do, and you can't chalk there and you can't this. So we just quietly walk up afterwards and go, and actually it's within your rights and it's washable off and you can get away with this. Oh, they got so mad. So on the age thing, that was the only thing I saw, was actually much like how I said women can shame them, so can the young, you know, and so can the elderly. So in some ways I find those things quite useful to use in activism. And I think the Green Party, you know, from Green Seniors, Young Greens, the whole swathe of it, I don't know, I really think that we're a good party like that. I think there's a good balance, and I don't feel, I mean, I think I'm the older end of the spectrum, Lily's the younger, Alison's in the middle, and I would so proudly stand and work with any of these people. You know, I don't see it, I don't know, maybe I'm not seeing what the questioner was seeing.
Lily?
I don't know what to say about a widespread problem, but I think on an individual level, we can all make sure to just not assume things about people based on their age, and in the same way that we wouldn't assume that a young person doesn't know what they're talking about, we won't assume that someone who's older is necessarily out of touch. You know, we will just treat people as we actually experience of them, rather than coming in with preconceived ideas.
Okay, thank you. Time for probably one more question. So to tie in with the question that was just asked, what message would you like to be heard the loudest for the next generation of activists, or people who are thinking about getting into environmental activism for the first time, taking their first steps. Let's go for Tina, then Lily, then Alison.
First, I'd like to say how sad I find it that our next generation is having to come into this. You know, as a child, I looked forward to the things that would be bright and brilliant about the future. And the young generation is now landed with all these awful, awful things to have to fight and defend. I suppose my message just to, you know, young women, you know, coming up through activism and politics is trust that you can. You know, I've watched that many women, you know, in their 70s and 80s who came to the fight for the first time, who said, I never will, I won't stand on that side of the road, but I'll be over here supporting you. Find a day that they crossed the road and they stood there and they blocked a truck. And I watched them and I thought, it's like a switch gets flicked of that. I believe I believe I can. I believe I have no option and I must. And then you overcome that hurdle of fear and everything that held you back, because Lily's discovered it so young, and I'm so proud of anybody like that. I wish I'd have had that at your age, but I didn't. It wasn't until I was much older. But, you know, seeing, you know, I take Olive, she's, you know, a grandmother of 21 grandchildren, good Catholic woman, has never ever done anything like this in her life. And she stood there that day and she stopped a truck and she looked over her shoulder, and I watched her wink at her husband, who later in the week reminded me that this stirs this passion inside his wife that he had not seen for decades. And now there was no stopping her. And I love that. And I love that empowerment of people at any age who can come to the fight, you know? And I just think, I think there's very little advice to give to the young other than be bold, be strong, trust you, you know?
Fabulous, thank you. Lily?
Yeah, I'd add to that about passion, in that a lot of people are motivated by a fear of the future. A lot of young people feel an overwhelming sense of climate anxiety, but that can't sustain you, particularly not if you're in this fight day in, day out. It needs to be empowering and it needs to be hopeful. Otherwise, you will just never make it. You will become burnt out or you will lose your motivation. And so it's about not just finding that passion within yourself, but making sure the people around you are also focusing on the right things and the right reasons.
Alison?
I'd remind them to be well aware that they can win. Yeah, it's really important to know that. I mean, Tina, you know, the campaign she has been involved in has been tremendously successful. Well, in this country, you know, there are still worries, but yeah, and the Sheffield Tree campaign was successful. We stopped them. It was an amazing thing to be a part of, and so you can be successful. With the right amount of passion, the right will, determination, you know, multiple strategies, you know, it's possible to win these things. Now, the climate crisis is way bigger than anything that we faced, yeah, so far. And so the strategy has to be quite different. And so I guess I would ask them to figure out as quickly as possible who their actual enemy is.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of our time, although we've got time for just one quick, slightly silly question, which is, what's your favourite biscuit? We'll go first to Tina, then to Alison, and then to Lily.
Oh, okay, dark chocolate and ginger if I have to, but I'm trying to avoid any of that stuff at the moment because I had a recent health scare that made me think, oh, I'm going to be healthy again. So yeah, so no. Oh, and I would just add that too. Sorry, I know there's no time. Activism is good for your health. You know, it does get you going.
Brilliant. Alison, favourite biscuit?
Shortbreads, they're not good for your health, but they're lovely with a cup of tea.
Yep, still tasty. And Lily?
A custard cream, because it makes me think of being like 14 and they're the cheapest one that tastes good.